Good morning, friends. Welcome to the EduSat Network. Our topic of discussion today is food culture in India, and for this discussion we have with us in our studio Dr. Shankar Kumar, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Hindu College, University of Delhi. His area of specialization is ancient Indian history and culture, and also Indian medicine, amongst many, and he has been teaching for nearly 15 years. He was also serving as the Deputy Director and Non-Collegiate Women Education Board, Delhi University in 2013. And with this introduction, I would like to welcome sir to our EduSat studio. Thank you so much, sir, for coming. And I also request you to begin our today's lecture.
Thank you, Urvashi. Good morning, viewers. As stated, we today would be talking about the food culture in India. The perspective would be distinctly historical and not sociological as it sounds, because we are treating culture in the sense of something which over a period of time got institutionalized, got instituted into everyday habits, everyday behavior, something which is shared and not individualized, shared amongst people, and something which is passed across generations and not confined to some kind of a fad, some kind of a fashion which is restricted to a couple of generations. So we are here talking of some kind of historical circumstances under which some food habits and some thoughts related to it. It could be taking the form of some religiosity. It could be taking the form of some medicinal aspects, getting imbued in the entire sense of food or food preparation or cooking as such. And these are the aspects that we shall be trying to explore. And you do well to remember that a couple of weeks, I think a couple of months ago, we had spoken about food culture, which can be used as some kind of a prelude to the discussion that we are having today. Now, taking the historical sense in mind, the first thing that comes to our mind when we talk of food is the times when in Indian subcontinent food production began, and that takes us to the Neolithic times, and we have already spoken about it earlier, and I'll just briefly recap those discussions, the high points of that discussion, just to maintain a kind of continuity to what we are discussing today. Now, in Indian subcontinent, in contrast to the worldwide timeline, which is put around 8000 BC or so, when food production began on a large scale, immediately around the Mesolithic, Neolithic transition period. So in Indian subcontinent, it is around 7000, 6000 BC, when for the first time at Mehergarh, which is now in present-day Pakistan, we have the beginning of food production, and it is from here that the kinds of grains, the kinds of species which were domesticated, animals included, which went on to become the staple diet of the people living in this area. And subsequently we find by around 3000 BC, around 2500 BC, in the civilizational matrix, that is the first broad-based civilization that Indian subcontinent through in the form of Harappan civilization, it is the grains, it is the species of plants and animals which were domesticated around the Neolithic times in this area around Mehergarh and the adjoining areas, that went on to constitute the staple diet of the Harappans, and that's where wheat and maize, barley, and so forth, they become very important. Some variants of pulses also, sugarcane, to mention a few, and there could be a variety of fruits for which we don't have any direct evidence in terms of paleobotanical evidence, but there are some representations on the potteries or elsewhere where we can have this kind of an inkling that they might be having these species also in their food basket. So that is about the ecology of the area, about the soil typology, about the environment, about the rainfall, which was just about optimal. If you take the Harappan zone into consideration, the average rainfall does not exceed more than 40 centimeters per annum, which is just about optimal for agricultural production and so forth. And given the technological limitation of the Harappans, in the sense that they were not prolific users of iron, probably iron was not known to them, iron technology was not utilized in production purpose, for agrarian purpose. So all they could use for plowing is perhaps wood, or at the most copper or bronze. And we all know that it has obvious limitation in terms of utilizing the subsoil moisture, and given the rainfall constraint, this becomes some kind of a handicap, and therefore a limited range of grains and plant species could be grown in this area. And of course there were animal species which were domesticated and probably also consumed, because we have animal bones which were artificially cut, in the sense that they were not the animals who died naturally. So obviously one can think of non-vegetarian component of the diet also significantly adding to the variety of species which constituted the food basket of the Harappans. And as we move along, we find in the Vedic period, of course we are glossing over the Chalcolithic cultures which subsequently sprang in the western and central part of India, which also goes on to constitute the regional pattern that we get to see in the food habits of India even today. And it took some very transformative impacts, like westernization or the colonial impact, and infusion of technology, commercialization of agriculture, which all happened around 19th century and is an ongoing process today, that we find these food varieties, these food baskets could be substituted in favor of something else as a result of the impact of commercialization, the impact of new seed varieties, intensive artificial irrigation techniques, which could transform in a sense the ecology of the area, the environment of the area, the food producing environment of the area, which could enrich the soil in immediate terms. And we have already gone through the first phase of green revolution, and presently we have started feeling the pinch of the intensive use of chemicals and fertilizers and some high yielding seed varieties and so forth. So it is impact of this enormous order which could change the traditional pattern, largely conditioned by the ecological reality of these regions, be it Western India, be it Central India, be it Northwestern part of India. As we all know that northwestern part of India, the Pakistan area, the Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, Delhi included, all these areas, food is almost synonymous with roti. Roti made of course, wheat. It could be bajra also before Green Revolution. So in this part of India, even today, we tend to say when we are having food and we want others to join us, we would say, "Aao roti kha lo." So this is a very typical expression which goes on into the culture of this area, which goes on into the vocabulary of the area. So as if food is synonymous with roti. Whereas if you move to eastern part of India, Bengal, Bihar, Assam, and northeastern part of India, eastern Uttar Pradesh, you'll find rice becoming very important as part of food, overall food, and therefore this expression perhaps is not encountered in the vocabulary of the eastern part of India, where rice is extremely important, and we do well to get into the history of this and understand that the Neolithic cultures that we have been talking of in the northwestern context of Indian subcontinent in the pre-Harappan times, in the eastern part of India, beginning of Neolithic is dated to around 3000, 2000 BC and not before that, and it is around this time that rice makes its entry in contrast to West, where it is wheat. It is synonymous with wheat. So Neolithic rice is anchored into the culture of the eastern part of Indian subcontinent as early as Neolithic times, be it Chirand, be it Chopani Mando in the eastern Uttar Pradesh, Chirand in Bihar, or even the Vindhya Neolithic, we find rice making its presence felt, and ever since it so seems that it has gone on to become the staple diet of the inhabitants in this area, and therefore has almost become synonymous with the overall culture and the vocabulary about food and diet in this part of India. Now, having talked about the Neolithic context and the Harappan context also in the northwestern part of India, let's come to the Vedic and the post-Vedic period, particularly in the context of North India, where it is making its presence felt, in the sense that the inhabitants, the architects of Vedic culture, are actually crisscrossing this northern part of India, the Gangetic belt, the Indo-Gangetic, and subsequently post 600 BC also into the lower and middle Gangetic plains. Which presently would be Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and subsequently Bengal. Now, what we find here is that though the beginning is in terms of predominantly pastoral economic flavor, we find that towards the later Vedic times, the Vedic people are increasingly taking to cultivation, probably under the influence and some kind of a give and take from the local inhabitants of this area, who could earlier be existing in this part of the world as Neolithic or Chalcolithic cultures, and once they interacted, the art of cultivation became more and more known to, or one can say that the Vedic people became socialized with the craft of cultivation, and this is inferred from the fact that most of the terms and implements names, even in the Vedic terminologies, are not Indo-Aryan words. They rather are loan words which are borrowed from local languages. So the Vedic word for plow is udumbar, and probably that is made of this wood, this particular wood, and probably the local people, and they are this is a non-Sanskrit word. So obviously there is fair degree of there is fair degree of transactions at the social and economic level happening with the local people, and resultantly agriculture is fast assuming the mainstay character of the Vedic people, the later Vedic people. And from here on, by the time we come to 600 BC, we start getting evidence of transplantation of rice also, in addition to, of course, wheat, barley, and so forth. For instance, in the early Vedic times, the only term for grain is yava. And yava is probably a generic name for all the grains, or it could just connote barley. But by the time we come to later Vedic times, we are encountering a variety of names for grains. Vrihi is the word which makes its entry for rice. Again, the origin of this is non-Aryan, and therefore we get this kind of an impression that as they moved along the Gangetic belt into the middle and lower Gangetic plains, there was intensification of agriculture, and new grains and new varieties of vegetation, new varieties of species became increasingly went on to become the part and parcel of their food habits. And if we come to the post 600 BC times, the times when Grihasutras are getting written, and subsequently we also find the medical treatises getting compiled in the works of Charak and Shushruta, Charak Samhita and Shushruta Samhita. They also give us very critical and crucial insight into the total conceptualization of food as part of culture. Although depending on the text and emphasis of the authors of these treatises, focus would differ. For instance, in say Sutra, Dharma Sutra literature, of course, it is ensconced in religiosity, whereas in medical literature, it is from the point of view of therapy. It is from the point of view of the therapeutic usage of particular grains, or for that matter, even meat of animals. So, what we find in sutras, for instance, there are different foods prescribed for children of different kinds, and the first feeding which happens, the first feeding of grain that happens, it is all documented that children of these kinds should be administered this kind of grain, and there it is all, as I said, it is all ensconced in religious terminologies and religious focus and emphasis. But more credible form of evidence can be had related to food from what understandably is a treatise on medicine. For instance, Charak Samhita and Sushruta Samhita, where surprisingly we find large or huge data related to different ecozones, different cultural zones, and the inhabitants of these areas are described in terms of their food habits, and which is by and large, despite so much of transformation having happened that we talked of towards the beginning of this lecture, by and large they do hold credible even in the present times. And we know from other sources also their predisposition to certain kinds of foods or prevalence of a particular kind of food as part of their culture and so forth. So even people outside India, for instance Greeks and people from Central Asia, or people from southern part of India, Deccan, Central India, eastern part of India, northern part of India, and so forth, they are all described as ethnic groups, and their food habits are also spoken of. But apart from these data, which is part of the culture of the times, what is more important is the conceptualization of food so far as Indian medicine as a system is concerned. So in Ayurveda, what we find is that digestion or taking in a particular kind of food is accorded utmost importance so far as total well-being of people is concerned, and as Ayurveda etymologically would mean, it is knowledge about longevity or total well-being. So it is not intended for a particular disease or malady as such, but it is the total well-being which is being spoken of, and therefore it is more ecologically rooted. The therapy itself is anchored on some kind of a conceptualization about the overall ecology, and therefore some of the classificatory schemata which is used in Ayurveda uses terms like jungle, Anup, and some kind of a statistical average of the two in the form of Sadharan. So jungle would be an area where the soil is somewhat barren, it is devoid of thick vegetation, so all that you have is thorny bushes. So it is by and large desert-like, semi-desert-like condition, typical of Rajasthan area, which is spoken of as a jungle, where the rainfall is very low, water is scarce, and huge tracts, barren tracts, preponderant. And in contrast to this is the polar opposite of jungle, and that is Anup, where water is abundantly present. The land is marshy, there is thick growth of vegetation, so it's a wet deciduous forest kind of a situation that we do encounter in Bengal and the northeastern part of Indian subcontinent. And talking of the times when these treatises were getting compiled, say around 600 to 100 BC, we find, we of course can presume that this growth of wet deciduous forest could have been much into the eastern part of Indian subcontinent, although they have receded, they can logically understood to have receded further into the northeastern part of India today, but of course in those times it could have encompassed this area as well. And so the variety of species, be it plants or animals, are described in terms of their ecological setting. The therapeutic usage of the species grown in this area or thriving in this area, animals, plants included, are accorded some specific medicinal value in terms of the Tridosha principle, which is the iconic principle of Ayurvedic classification in terms of Vayu, Pitta, Kapha, and so forth. Also in terms of taste, which can be savored, salty, sweet, acrylic, and so forth. There's a variety of 6 tastes which are mentioned in Ayurveda, and they are all classified accordingly. And interesting part is that the Sanskrit word for food, for making food, that is for cooking, and the Sanskrit word for digestion are the same. So, pach is the word that we use for digestion of food in Sanskrit. Similarly, pach is the word that we use for cooking of food. In a fantastic work by a German philosopher, which is a very good transdisciplinary work on Indian medicine, which goes on to explore the ecological setting of the ancient Indian medicine by Francis Zimmerman, does talk of this fact that probably the imagery of ancient Indian medicine, so far as food is concerned, or so far as medicine is concerned, is actually taken from the process of cooking of food. And therefore, the food which goes inside our body and the way stomach assimilates it, it's almost like the imagery is like some food getting cooked in fire. So, for instance, the hunger, the urge to eat is also understood with reference to Jataragni, which is again the root word is Agni. So, fire becomes important here. And it is as if something comes in the stomach, and it is the fire in the stomach which cooks it, which renders it fit for body consumption, and then it goes to different parts of the body, and that's how the entire process happens. And the therapy is actually premised on these principles, and therefore it is as a result of that digestion by fire in the belly which transforms the food in different forms, and that is what circulates in our body. With this kind of an insight from the ancient Indian medicine about food, one can infer how important this culture of having food must have been in these times. Also important from the medicine point of view and culture in general is the principle of the ever-recurring principle of Satmya, which is so profusely present in Ayurvedic treatises. Now, Satmya would here mean appropriateness of food for certain kind of people, and Ayurveda, although ancient Indians had typical penchant for classification, and Ayurveda is no exception to that, but you'll find that different seasons, different people living in particular regions, and depending on several other factors, they are all enumerated in Ayurveda, that this particular food is appropriate for this kind of people who belong to these areas with, of course, identified with reference to ecological setting of jungle, Anup and other categories. And it is not as if every food is appropriate, so the combination, the system of combinatorics comes into picture. And it is as a result of the calming or exciting one dosh with reference to the exciting or calming property of the opposite food which is administered. So the principle of natural violence, which is endemic to ecological setting, be it lion and gazelle, or buffalo and lion, or elephants, and so belonging to Anup and jungle area, the prey and predator linkage, that is all invoked in terms of some animal flesh being regarded or not regarded as fortifying to the person who is consuming that meat. So all these things are very much part and parcel of the philosophy, or you can say the critical insight of Indian medical system. And all these aspects go on to inform us about the centrality of food and the culture of food in general, so far as ancient Indian situation is concerned. And maybe when we have more time, we would elaborate on the other aspects of food culture in India, which of course happened as a result of coming of a different set of people from different cultural zones, and some technological transformations, some commercial considerations, as I mentioned towards the beginning of the lecture, in the 19th century and so forth, the coming of the Europeans, tomatoes, potato, we all are aware of that, which went on to become the staple diet of India today. But so far as the institutionalized character, instituted character of some of the thoughts, mental predispositions, and even healing are concerned, food is a central item as a component of overall culture in ancient India.
Thank you so much, sir. And as sir has rightly summed up for us today, we discussed food culture in India from a historical perspective, but we shall be back soon with more lectures on this specific topic, covering a different perspective, a different look or perspective at it. So with this, I would like to thank sir for being here. Thank you so much, sir, and we hope that you will be associated with us very soon for another lecture. And again, thank you so much, viewers. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.